Muchas gracias por estar aquí, bienvenidos. Yo soy Cecilia, no soy Tor.
As I always do, I apologize, I don't speak Spanish. Long story, but I grew up in Vermont, 30 minutes from the Canadian border, Montreal, and they speak French, so I took French in high school.
Me disculpo como siempre por no saber hablar español. Crecí en Vermont, que es muy cerquita de la frontera con Canadá, donde hablan francés, así que hablo muy bien francés e inglés, pero nada de español.
Of course, now I live in Los Angeles, and there's a lot of Spanish-speaking people in Los Angeles, not so many French.
Ahora vivo en Los Ángeles, donde mucha gente sí habla en español, pero casi nadie habla en francés, así que tengo este mismo problema.
Anyway, I hope we'll have some fun today. This is about exposure, working with digital sensors. I've got some video clips to show. I don't think we'll have time for like an actual shoot, but we'll see by the end.
Vamos a hablar un poco sobre el sensor de esta nueva cámara y cómo sacarle el mejor partido. Tengo para mostrarles algunos videoclips. Lo que no creo que tengamos tiempo es de probar la cámara rodando propiamente dicha.
All right, let's get started. I like to show this slide. This is me operating at the ASC Awards. It was fun. We did this for 3 years in a row, all Blackmagic cameras and Blackmagic switchers.
Este soy yo probando una de las cámaras. Venimos haciendo este mismo trabajo hace 3 años con las cámaras de Blackmagic y los ATEM switchers de Blackmagic.
It was especially stressful because I'm working in front of some of my favorite cinematographers like Roger Deakins.
Dice que es un poco estresante porque le tocó trabajar, en ese caso, con muchos directores de fotografía que son sus favoritos, como por ejemplo Roger Deakins.
And this is 2 weeks ago, Coachella, operating all Blackmagic cameras. We had 36 at the show.
Esto fue hace un par de semanas atrás en Coachella, si todos conocen el festival. Trabajamos con, how many cameras, sorry? 36 cámaras Blackmagic para la transmisión en vivo.
Across 7 stages, they were Ursa Broadcast G2s.
Fue en 7 escenarios. Tenían, how many? Ursa
Broadcast G2.
Con las cámaras Ursa Broadcast G2. Sorry.
Couple shots. This is a very, very expensive lens, brand new from Fuji, 25 to 1,000 millimeter, Super 35 glass.
Again?
You say lots of money.
Yeah. Dice que ese es un lente de Sony muy, muy caro, muy sensible y muy lindo.
But you can see all Ursa Broadcast G2s with professional cinema glass.
Que todos son lentes con profesionales, son lentes de cine, básicamente.
Let me switch sides with you, I think.
Yeah?
I can see the screen better.
Yeah.
I figured I'd give you just a quick demo reel so you see some stuff I've done. Unfortunately, I need to update it, as most people are always not updating their reel soon enough. It's like 5 years old now.
Que ahora nos va a mostrar su reel como cinematógrafo y que, para variar, como todos nosotros, tiene el reel bastante desactualizado. Así que vamos a ver un reel que tiene como 5 años de antigüedad, pero que sirve todavía. Come on.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Like I said, as soon as I get home, I'll make the new one. So next month will be my 9th year with Blackmagic. It went by in a blink.
Sorry?
My 9th year with Blackmagic. Next month.
El próximo mes voy a cumplir 9 años trabajando con Blackmagic.
So since I started 9 years ago, we've made 24 cameras since then.
Desde que empecé hasta ahora, en estos 9 años, hemos hecho 24 cámaras.
Here's some of the most current ones. Today I brought with me the 12K, roughly $6,000 US for the 12K body.
Estas son algunas de las más populares. La que tenemos hoy acá es la Blackmagic Ursa Mini Pro 12K, que es una cámara que sale aproximadamente unos $6,000 solamente el cuerpo.
There's a close-up of the 12K. This is one of my rigs at home, just the way I kind of work with my Ursa Mini bodies and how I accessorize.
Esta es la forma en la que yo suelo equipar mi cámara y los accesorios que suelo agregarle a esta cámara para trabajar.
And there's a different angle. You can see typical things that I do with the matte box, a video assist monitor on top, electronic viewfinder.
En esta cámara se puede ver desde el lateral que le agrego un típico matte box, perdón, tenía el micrófono muy lejos, un monitor externo para poder ver y what else? And focus puller,
Yeah. Wireless follow focus.
Ya. El switch del inglés al español. Eso. El viewfinder electrónico. Eso.
We didn't have a chance to rehearse, sorry.
Ya. Disculpen, no tuvimos oportunidad de ensayar esta charla, así que estamos intentando complementarnos lo mejor posible. Sepan disculpar.
I just wanted to add this quick video promo that I got access to recently. We were honored to be included in this year's HBO Camera Assessment Series. Amongst cameras that are over $100,000. Ours is $6,000, as you'll see.
Ahora vamos a ver el demo de HBO, al que por suerte y orgullosamente pudimos acceder con esta cámara que sale $6,000 en comparación con otras cámaras que se piden que salen por encima de $100,000.
HBO has always been on the forefront of the creative process.
They'll let you try anything.
They're definitely pioneers.
I think they've really been a leader.
The history and prestige.
It's great when it just goes.
What unites people? Stories.
HBO asks, what is the best technological means for telling a story?
The blending of art and technology.
What serves this story the best?
That was one of the most revolutionary things about the camera assessment.
Over the past 10 years,
the world has changed so dramatically.
It used to be about, can you tell the difference between film and digital? And I think we've moved past that.
The HBO camera assessment, it's an objective evaluation of the latest in camera technology.
Getting everybody in the same room, looking at the same images.
To give the knowledge to make informed decisions.
The saturation level is very high.
Gee, I don't think that's true.
Action.
We're bringing in the Arri Alexa Mini, the Red V Raptor, Venice 2, Blackmagic 12K Pro, and the new Super 35mm 4K Arri camera.
When we started this 10 years ago, film was our benchmark.
It's the perfect time to bring film back.
The latest digital cameras and film.
You can turn it to 11 and see what happens.
At what point does it snap?
Pushing the industry as a whole forward in camera technology.
We're on the set of our skin tone test, color and patterns test, mixed color lighting, image elasticity.
And then we created the widest amount of dynamic range ever done in a physical space. What if you could shoot under nothing but the light of the moon? Does that create an acceptable image?
The strengths and the weaknesses.
For the greater good of filmmaking.
Gives you a great deal of freedom.
To help creatives be more creative.
There's nothing in the world more powerful than a good story.
So that makes me really proud because we've always been kind of an underdog in the industry. We're fairly new to cameras, 10, 11 years in.
Estamos muy orgullosos de haber accedido a esta selección de cámaras porque efectivamente en 10 años hemos logrado introducir una cámara de $6.000 en un mercado que se manejaba con cámaras de por encima de 100.
So anyway, moving on. Exposure, native ISO. Some people have a misunderstanding of what native ISO is. It's basically a determination by the manufacturer. Sorry, I won't go too long. The manufacturer determines what the best ISO is based on noise level and latitude in the shadow and the highlight areas.
Los fabricantes, vamos a hablar un poco sobre latitud, sobre qué es el ISO nativo de una cámara. A veces las personas malinterpretan qué es exactamente el ISO nativo de una cámara. El ISO nativo de una cámara es algo que determinan los fabricantes de una cámara y que tiene que ver justamente con cómo captan en términos de ruido o de captación de luces bajas o altas.
So for each of our cameras and each sensor, we put out these charts that show the latitude based on the ISO level. How many stops you get in the highlights, how many stops you get in the shadows.
Nosotros hemos desarrollado para nuestras cámaras este chart que nos permite evaluar cuál es el ISO que podemos tener, cuántos stops podemos tener en este ISO en las luces bajas y en las luces altas.
So you can see it's kind of in the middle, ISO 800 for the 12K. But if you wanted to have more detail in the highlights, you might choose a higher ISO.
Dice que podemos usar este ISO intermedio y tener una muy buena captación, un gran rango dinámico, pero si quisiéramos tener mayor captación, sobre todo en las luces altas, lo ideal es subir un poco más, trabajar con ISOs más altos.
You can see on the chart, when I go from 800 to 1600, we get an extra stop. You get an extra stop of information in the highlights when you go up one stop in exposure.
Que tenés más información en el ISO de las altas luces en cuanto vas subiendo de a un stop, va de 800 a 1600 en un stop.
And then dual gain, this is an example of a chart with dual gain, like our Pocket 6K and Pocket 4K, and now Ursa Broadcast G2 also has a 6K dual gain sensor. So there's two ranges, there's a low end and the high end, and there's two native ISOs. In this case, it's ISO 400 and 3200.
Esta es una muestra de cómo funciona el sensor con dos gains. ¿Se entiende, no? Eso, como con dos ISOs. ¿Sí? Con un ISO nativo, en este caso, de... What was the first one?
400.
De 400
and 3200.
Y 3200 en las luces altas.
And then you can use this to your creative advantage, of course, by doing native. This is kind of the best of both worlds as far as noise level and latitude above and below.
I got a little bit lost because I don't hear it. So, can you say it again?
So the negative is 400
Yeah.
on the low end, but there might be a reason you'd go higher ISO to get more room in the highlights.
Que el nativo está bien, pero que bueno, que tiene buena latitud, pero que podríamos querer tener más captación en las luces altas, entonces podríamos subir un stop.
But then you're also potentially adding a little bit more noise. So if you end up getting to, say, ISO 800, I usually recommend that you jump to ISO 1250, which is the violet purple area, which is the new gain circuit.
Que cada vez que subimos el ISO, lo que probablemente suceda es que vamos a estar ganando ruido, además de tener más captación en las luces altas. Entonces, lo que recomiendan es usar este ISO, que es el segundo ISO del dual gain. Sería aquel el primero y este el segundo.
So it's about choices, creative choices or technical choices, but it's important as a cinematographer to understand your sensor and to understand how to optimize it.
Son decisiones que pueden ser creativas o, bueno, técnicas, llegado el caso, pero que es muy importante como directores de fotografía o fotógrafos o usuarios de las cámaras conocer y entender el sensor para saber qué es lo que podemos hacer y cómo optimizarlo y sacar el mejor partido.
So I'll go through this fairly quickly. Several different ways to do exposure. Zebras. Zebra is a kind of old school exposure. Like the TV ENG guys would use zebras. Zebras are diagonal lines on the screen.
Que algunas de las formas para detectar son esas manchas, cebras, sí, así les dicen.
So you choose where you want the zebras to light up. In this case, at 100%, that lets you know you're overexposed.
Sorry. Yeah.
You set the level. It's okay. Histogram, I don't recommend histogram usually, but we have it in all of our cameras in the lower left corner.
Que no recomienda usar el histograma.
And then false color, we'll get to that later. And then, of course, light meters are still used on set or in pre-production and scouting. Light meters.
Que recomienda idealmente para detectar cuando están las luces altas. O sea, hay otras opciones para detectar esas luces altas, el false color, pero él recomienda medir con un medidor.
And then also light meters are good for setting light ratios, you know, for shadow side, highlight side, you know, 3:1 ratios and so on.
Que un fotómetro te va a dar mucha más precisión en cuanto a qué tipo de ISO usar para cada captación.
And of course, if you have a professionally calibrated monitor, it's not a technical way of doing exposure, but it's somewhat reliable, just not scientific.
También podemos chequear en un monitor profesional de corrección de color. No es lo que más se hace porque profesionalmente no tenemos acceso a eso en general en el set, pero es una buena forma para chequear cómo está funcionando nuestro sensor y cómo estamos captando.
And then lastly, using waveform, parade, vector, histograms, and that's why I usually have one of the video assists on top of my cameras so I can get access to all those scopes.
Y lo ideal es usar los instrumentos que solemos usar en general, como el parade, vector scope o histograma, pero de los que están en un monitor electrónico, como este que tiene aquí en su cámara.
Okay. And here's the video assist, little marketing shot. And this is an example of how I work. Typically, this is just an interview with the ex-mafia guy from Chicago. And so here's my camera. I'm using this to monitor up here. It's more color accurate. It's an HDR display, and it has all the scopes on it.
Acá estábamos haciendo una entrevista para televisión a un muchacho de la mafia de Chicago y como verán está su cámara y él está monitoreando la exposición con este monitor que es HDR y además se le pueden poner distintas LUTs y es mucho más preciso.
Video assist. Let's skip over this. Using false color. So I have a little video. It makes it a little easier to show in this space. A video that we'll look at together. And I don't think you need to translate this. So here's our chart. It's similar to other false color charts, like ARRI has the same chart. Basically, red is clipping in the highlights, purple or violet is clipping in the shadow areas, meaning loss of information.
Esto es más o menos una estructura de cómo funciona el False Color Chart, que es esta herramienta que nos indica cómo estamos trabajando en la exposición, donde el rojo es el clipeo, el clamping de las luces altas, y el morado de aquella esquina habla sobre el clampeo de las luces bajas.
And then, of course, green will light up as middle gray. It's very important, and we'll use that with the color chart later.
El verde indica lo que sería el gris medio, ¿sí? Que es muy importante tenerlo en cuenta cuando vemos, por ejemplo, el false color, saber dónde está el gris medio para movernos de ahí.
So in my workshops, I tend to spend a lot of time with false color just because one of the biggest mistakes new filmmakers in digital cinema make is underexposure, and this is a guaranteed way to get perfect exposure.
Dice que él dedica mucho tiempo en sus workshops a explicar cómo funciona el false color como herramienta, porque hay una tendencia a subexponer en los nuevos directores justamente por no saber cómo usar adecuadamente esta herramienta. Entonces es muy importante saber cómo exponer correctamente y saber interpretar esta herramienta para eso.
So here's the video, if it'll hopefully play. Do I do it or he does it?
The false color setting toggles the appearance of false color exposure assistance on the LCD touchscreen, but it can also be activated on the camera's video outports. False color overlays different colors onto your image that represent exposure values for different elements in your scene. For example, pink represents optimum exposure for lighter skin tones, while green is a good match for darker skin tones. Green also represents middle gray, also known as 18% reflectance. As I will demonstrate shortly, this is a very useful exposure technique when using color charts that include an 18% gray chip. Additionally, when elements in your image light up red, that means they are overexposed and the highlights will be clipped. When you see violet, those areas are underexposed and indicate a loss of detail in the shadows. Once you get used to using false color, it will quickly become your standard method for exposure on cinema cameras. I use it so much, on each of my cameras I program the first function button to toggle false color on and off. Okay, let's take a look at how it works in a real-world shooting scenario. So in this example, I have one light in the foreground as a key, lighting up Erica, and then I have two practical lamps in the background. Now the lamps are on a dimmer, and the key light is on a dimmer. And during this section, I won't make any adjustments to the camera, only to the light levels in the foreground and the background. So we start off with the 18% gray lit up as green for proper exposure. Now we've overexposed the foreground and the background, underexposed the foreground, overexposed the background, and then dialing in the foreground to be perfectly exposed, and then correcting the background until nothing is clipping. Proper exposure. And then we'll go again with overexposure, front and back, and then dial in the background, and then correct the foreground to be 18% gray on the card, right there. And now we have perfect exposure. And then here's the final color grade, a little adjustment on the background light, and there we have it. In this next section, I'm going to demonstrate how to get perfect exposure of an interior subject with an exterior daylight background. All right, in this demonstration, we're going to show how to use false color with Blackmagic cinema cameras. False color is a very valuable tool to give you perfect exposure and to feed the sensor just the right amount of light so you reduce your noise and you increase your dynamic range. So we're starting off with a very, very bright background. This is Southern California, pure sunlight, unfiltered, undiffused, at the brightest point of the day, lighting up my neighbor's house, the cars in the driveway. Over here, you can see there's clipping. Red would be clipping the sensor, so with loss of information in the highlight areas. And then yellow up here is approaching loss of information, kind of like a warning area. So I like to be safe and make sure that I don't have any yellow or red. And then a little bit later on, we'll see underexposure. If we could iris down all the way to 16, you'll see this deep violet, purple, fuchsia color. Fuchsia, or this purple, is underexposure or loss of information. No matter how good your colorist is, you're not going to be able to pull detail back into these dark areas. Blue happens to be approaching loss of information in the shadows. You can see on my walls here, it's just basically exposed, but not nearly enough light to give proper exposure. So I'm basically a silhouette, and the outside's probably even a little dark too. So we're gonna iris back to somewhere in the middle, around 5.6, so that we're just not clipping. Get rid of all the yellow, get rid of all the red in the false color. And you can see here, if I step out of the way, there's a little spot. We can get rid of that, dial it down with the iris. And now we're perfectly exposed in the background.
Next step is to introduce an interior LED key light and precisely control its output to properly expose the color chart using false color as an exposure tool, because
false color will turn green when middle gray is properly exposed. So I'm going to do that not with iris, but with dimming the light. I'm going to bring it up slowly, and I'm going to raise the dimmer until my 18% gray chip turns green in false color. I'm at 5060 Kelvin. I'm going to bring this up until I see that gray chart turn green. And there, it looks like I kind of hit it there. I'm at about 86% juice on the light. Just to show you, I can go over, and then I can go back under, and then just find that happy spot where middle gray turns green. Okay, now that we've set exposure for the background, the bright sun exterior, and then lit up the interior to balance the ratio so we can keep both foreground and background exposed properly, we have now achieved perfect exposure. And that's all using false color on a Blackmagic cinema camera.
And in this final section, I must add that while it's important to know how to achieve perfect exposure, it's also important to know that you can break those rules and underexpose a scene, get a clipping highlight in the background, maybe a practical is overexposed, or a window gets a little bit too bright. Perfectly normal and perfectly common in major Hollywood feature films. Here we have a silhouette scene in Sicario, where of course the foreground's going to be underexposed, and then we're properly exposed for the skyline. Interior car scene, a little bit under, inside, a little over, outside. Perfectly fine. Makes a nice dramatic contrast. Here's an interior scene with a very, very bright window that's overexposed and clipping, but that's perfectly acceptable. Maybe exactly how it would look to the human eye.
I want to follow through. Merci.
Underexposure here in 1917. This is like a low light scene at night with just a little lamp in the background and some fire in the foreground lighting up the scene. This creates a nice dark, rich black. And here's another sort of semi-silhouette scene with an overexposed, overcast skyline in the background.
Do you know where Lieutenant Blake is, sir?
Here's a window, clipping, but perfectly normal. It creates a nice high contrast scene.
Awesome.
His skin tone's a little bit under as he's backlit.
Something in his eyes.
And the reverse of Ryan, slightly over as he's front lit. There you have it. I hope this video has been helpful for you and that you can now use false color effectively in controlling your exposure.
¿Alguna pregunta? ¿Alguien tiene preguntas sobre la utilización de esta herramienta? ¿Quedó clara? Sí, a pesar de que estaba toda la explicación en inglés, ¿fue lo suficientemente clara?
Anything? We're good? No, please.
In the highlight recovery option you got in DaVinci, what native ISO would you choose? Like if you're thinking of getting back that 1.5 of highlight.
It depends on the camera because we have different sensors. They react differently, but if the native ISO, like on this, is 800, and if I'm trying to preserve window detail, it's really bright, I might choose 1,000, maybe 1,600 possibly, to capture even more room in the highlights.
¿Se entendió la respuesta? ¿No?
Sí, es que Blackmagic tiene DaVinci tiene la opción con el Blackmagic Rock de recuperar un punto del Highlight Recovery. Le preguntaba qué ISO nativo era el adecuado, teniendo en consideración que puedo recuperar ese punto y medio después. Como 1000, 1250 por ahí. 1600.
Yeah, so the native is 800. If I wanted an extra stop of room in the highlights, I might go to 1600. But I wouldn't want to underexpose at 1600 because then you're potentially getting noise. So you have to have still proper exposure at 1600. So I always tell people, when in doubt, overexposure is better than underexposure. On our sensors, we can do 5 stops overexposure and still pull it back to normal. So you can make mistakes in overexposure, but don't make mistakes in underexposure.
Que siempre la recomendación en general es sobreexponer y nunca subexponer. Esto además lo corroboro como colorista. Si siempre tenemos la opción de los negros llevarlos más hacia abajo, pero probablemente no sea posible traerlos de vuelta si están subexpuestos. Y vamos a ganar ruido, ¿sí? Y a perder definición en las luces bajas cuando sí tenemos la posibilidad de volver de los highlights, como comentaba acá nuestro compañero.
Like if I was to expose for her face and I get the green on the chart for proper exposure, I can turn my iris 5 stops open and still pull that back and still get very good looking image.
¿Alguna otra pregunta?
I always tell people that our sensors behave a lot like 35 millimeter negative. I go back to the days when I shot motion picture film, and when you're shooting negative likes to get more information, more light burned in, so you get a thick negative. That's what they used to call it, a thick negative, when you have lots of light exposed to the negative. You don't want to do the opposite with film, and you don't want to do the opposite with our sensor.
Dice que el sensor de estas cámaras es muy similar a las cámaras de 35 milímetros cuando registraban en fílmico y que eso las hace generar... me perdí al final, un poco larga. Bueno, eso, que se comportan de esa manera y que por eso tienen este comportamiento en cuanto a al registro de las luces bajas y altas.
Any other questions?
Sí, no.
How did the shootout with the other cameras on HBO went?
I get to see...
¿Cómo le fue la competencia de las cámaras de HBO del video que había mostrado?
The first screening I was invited to see the results was during Coachella, so I couldn't go. But now the second screening is at Cinegear in Los Angeles in 2 weeks at Paramount Studios, and I get to go watch it there for the first time. But I will add, when I gave them my camera, I gave them this camera for the test. They needed more media, so I gave them CFast cards. And they didn't format the CFast cards when they gave them back, so I got to see the footage. And it looked really, really good.
Dice que todavía no pudo ver los resultados de esas pruebas, que los van a ver en 2 semanas más en Los Ángeles, pero que bueno, él tuvo la oportunidad de ver algo del material que se había registrado porque no borraron el material cuando le devolvieron la cámara después de hacer las pruebas, así que algo pudo ver, pero no sabe exactamente cómo salieron esas pruebas hasta que no las vean 2 semanas más en Paramount. ¿Sí? ¿Cómo hacen que sean tan baratas? Si justamente estábamos hablando de que lograron insertar en menos de 10 años una cámara muy económica en un mercado de cámaras muy caras. Entonces la pregunta es, ¿cómo lo hacen?
Blackmagic?
Magia negra.
I'll be here all tomorrow as well. There's another workshop that's even more fun. It's on getting the cinematic look tomorrow at 3 o'clock in the other auditorium.
Mañana a las 3 de la tarde vamos a estar haciendo un workshop en el otro auditorio que va a ser muy entretenido. Vamos a estar haciendo cosas propiamente, las manos en la masa.
It's less technical, more creative.
Es mucho menos técnico y creativo, más orientado a probar la cámara. También estamos en el stand de allá afuera si quieren pasar.
Two last notes.
Dos notas más.
I believe photographers should know Photoshop and cinematographers should know DaVinci Resolve. So if you don't know DaVinci Resolve, learn it. You can download it for free today. Windows, Linux, Mac. Talk to Cecilia, it's a professional artist. She knows, come visit our booth.
Que pueden pasar a visitarnos y que si son directores de fotografía o están pensando en serlo o en trabajar en video, lo más recomendado es que también trabajen con DaVinci Resolve o por lo menos lo conozcan, sepan cómo se maneja y justamente cómo hacer este tipo de ajustes y de optimización del sensor. Una pregunta.
Yes, please. We have a little time.
No, me gustaría si nos podría precisar un poquito la diferencia en la utilización entre el fast color y el fotómetro. ¿Dónde usted ve la diferencia? Porque hizo una salvedad que era, en algunos casos era mejor o era más preciso que el fast color, ¿no? Si nos podría ampliar un poquito sobre eso, por favor.
What about the photometer?
The light
Which
meter?
is the difference between the false color and using a meter?
I think the false color is way more accurate. The false color is telling you exactly what the sensor is seeing. The light meter is, it's a good reference point, but I would always default to false color.
Dice que el false color es mucho más preciso porque básicamente lo que hace es traducir lo que ve el sensor de la cámara. El fotómetro no, el fotómetro es un medidor de luz, digamos que uno usa en función de la distancia que tiene la cámara y que puede o no ser tan preciso como sí es el false color que está siendo directamente interpretado por el sensor.
I want to thank the Blackmagic camera operators in the back.
Recientemente en el equipo adquirimos las...
That's the standard. He asked, how did you choose those colors for false color? That's been the standard. That's what I think Ari set. There's variables, of course.
Sí. Que recientemente en el equipo adquirimos las cámaras, las Pocket 6K Pro de Blackmagic, y quería saber si me podría dar como algunos consejos para sacar como el mejor partido a la cámara.
They have recently bought the 6K Pro Blackmagic Cinema Pocket, and they are interested in some tips to get the most of that cameras.
I talked a little bit about the dual gain range, so knowing that 1250 is going to be cleaner than 1000. This doesn't make sense, if you think about just in terms of numbers, but 1000 is going to be noisier than 1250. That's important to know. There's no reason why you shouldn't expose at low ISO if you can, 200, 400, but that will shift where you're recording the highlight information and the shadow information. It shifts where middle gray is. This is tough. I'm so sorry, Cecilia.
No, it's okay. Dice que en general lo ideal es usar la exposición correcta y no subirla demasiado por esto que comentaba de que ganan mucho ruido, que por supuesto que podés elegir ISOs más bajos, pero que eso siempre te va a, o sea, para no tener tanto ruido, pero bueno, subexponer siempre es lo que no se recomienda. Entonces lo ideal es trabajar con el ISO medio, digamos. No pasarse mucho de los 1000, digamos, de 1000 y no mucho más para allá.
Any other questions?
Any other questions? ¿Preguntas? ¿Más preguntas? Pueden pasar por el stand y conversar directamente con Tor y probar las cámaras directamente para ver justamente todas estas cosas que estuvimos conversando. Y también pueden pasar a poner manos en el DaVinci in situ. Así que están más que invitados e invitadas.
Big thank you to Cecilia.